Hello everyone, I think it is about time we talked about Panzer Corps 2's Axis Operations 1943 DLC, especially since it came out like half a year ago and I haven't done my usual doodle coverage of it. And the reality is that while I will continue covering new content coming out for Panzer Corps 2, there will be no more doodle videos explaining each and every missions. The main reason being that for all of its traditional scenario and campaign structure, Panzer Corps 2 has become this incredibly customizable sandbox. So much so that everyone is playing in their own style, and if you have any problems dealing with any particular mission, you have an incredible tool set for tackling that, from the traditional difficulty switch to the advanced options that give you incredible leeway in how you want to play your campaign, to command traits, to the heroes you get to combine, well, and ultimately the special challenges if the things are not spicy enough for you. And thus, I just don't see any point in explaining any specific scenarios, which you can explore yourself and see if we can manage them and then adjust your campaign. And so this video and all of the upcoming cracking videos about Panzer Corps 2 content is going to be more in the vein of my campaign impressions, any findings, any interesting points I discover, and tricks that worked for me. So let's get to 1943, shall we? The DLC appropriately covers the German operations in the run-up to the Battle of Kursk, the Battle of Kursk itself, and the two possible outcomes to it. That's right, 1943 is committing to this sacrilege of doing both the historic and ahistoric parts. If you don't know, the Axis Operations series is a successor to the Grand Campaign of Panzer Corps 1, and despite the occasional deviation, it stuck pretty firmly to the historical events. Now, Axis Operations 1943 splits its campaign roughly midway and ultimately results in two endings. Either it's historic, with you following the route at Citadelle and the retreat of the German forces to the Dnieper River and beyond in 1943, or the ahistoric ending where you disobey the orders of the High Command and just miraculously encircle Soviet troops and destroy craploads of them, and then rush back to the Caspian Sea and Astrakhan, and eventually returning to Stalingrad. I mean, literally, the last mission is called Return to Stalingrad. So what are my impressions of all of this insane nonsense? I went through the entirety of this DLC a couple of days before I published this video, and it essentially has occupied all of my gaming attention for a few days before that, which is always a good sign, and this is easily one of the best, if not the best DLC that's come out for this game ever. Unlike 1942, it's been fairly consistent in terms of quality and challenge. There were virtually no forgettable scenarios, maybe slightly so in the beginning. There's obviously the training mission, and Operation Roland is a bit simple, but it kind of introduces you to this fork in the narrative. But overall, I see that the design is somewhat more geared towards people with a legacy core, which I used, and on Generalissimus difficulty and legacy that I've had since Spanish Civil War, it felt like smooth playing with the occasional troublesome bit. And by the way, this is the first DLC where I dropped my old wonderful Berdeja tank that I'd had since the Spanish Civil War. In 1942, it was still okay. 43... forget about it. Furthermore, I found that the historic branch is considerably more difficult than the ahistoric. The enemy strength, especially in the air, the difficulty with the terrain, and the fact that you often have to retreat and run away in the face of a force that is by design overwhelming and way too powerful to control. Speaking of which, if you haven't played the Air Force only Taman Peninsula mission, it is option after all, but you shouldn't avoid it, because I believe it delivered an enjoyably tense and stressful experience of what essentially is the opposite of a naval landing in the face of overwhelming forces and without all the hero-encrusted land troops that you usually use. And yet, despite the suspense and the huge imbalance between the enemy forces and your own, I didn't find myself resorting to much save scumming. It's a very smooth experience. Certainly try this mission. It's probably one of the best in the DLC, one of the best in the game. The ahistoric branch is somewhat surprisingly significantly easier, but I really enjoyed this foray into the desert areas near the Caspian Sea. A huge change from what you see prior to that, and the focus on destroying the Soviet River and Caspian Sea fleets, which is yet another point that makes that part of the DLC stand out so much and puts it in such a polar opposite contrast to the historic branch. I also really enjoyed the North Africa vibe with the rather sparse terrain, not too many enemies, and all of the tanks just moving forward. And this kind of leads me to a couple of discoveries I made as I was building my core force during the DLC, and the first one is that now I'm a committed Pantherist. I've stopped using Tigers entirely, mainly because of that one point of movement, which can be critical in places like the Soviet desert. And if you know me, I really like fast-moving units that I can move from one part of the front to another. Higher speeds lend themselves better to more improvisational style of command. This is especially important if you are playing without the Master of Blitzkrieg trait, which I did not in this playthrough. Panthers also get a little boost in their AT power, and all of that for a little reduction in the defensive capabilities, which in the long run just means that you'll have to spend a little bit more prestige repairing your tanks than usual. And if you're like me and you've accumulated 30, 40,000 prestige or even more across all of the campaigns, you're probably not going to notice the difference. Plus, with a Legacy Core, you're probably going to be able to compensate that defense deficiency with heroes anyway. And finally, and most importantly, Panther kind of looks like a tank and not like a monstrously oversized kitchen implement. In fairness, Tigers may be slightly more useful in the tighter spaces of the historic branch of the campaign, but in general, go Panther. My second discovery is another animal, the brown bear. This ugly guy was a kind of a holy crap, it's actually kind of good kind of moment. It is essentially a continuation of this bunker buster series of vehicles starting from Stug B, and I've sincerely tried to integrate them into my core, and they've always felt underwhelming. Brombeer is essentially a short-range Hummel at, well, I wouldn't say half the price, but 3 core slots compared to 5 is a significant discount. And I've really enjoyed their performance so far because they pack a serious punch and you can have crap loads of them. Obviously, this is not the artillery that will become the only kind that you use, but a horde of Brumbears rushing forward along with the tanks, helping them blast enemy infantry in forests as they advance, is a real proposition with virtually no loss in firepower. And given how tank units become so powerful in later war, I feel like there's a shift in the way I see the composition of my artillery. It used to be that I would have a bunch of 15cm heavy artillery guns and 1 or 2 big mortars for long-range performance. At this point, I'm not even using mortars, it's mostly Brumbeers and 1 or 2 Hummels just in case I need to deal with something annoying behind enemy lines. This is a much more flexible, mobile, and cheaper proposition, and I essentially never see my artillery lagging behind the tanks and the infantry as Toad's artillery tends to. It is worth noting, though, that I played 1943 with the meticulous planning trait. It gives your land units a second trait, and it's easily one of the best traits you can take. And I think with a point-blank artillery piece like Brumbeer, it's a game changer. Because now you can shuffle all these numerous Brumbeers you can afford in and out, easily wiping out any difficult enemy defenses the game throws at you. So this is the takeaway for vehicles, children. Forget about Toad guns, forget about Tigers, Ferdinands, it's all boring 1930s garbage. Go Brumbeer, go Yak Panther, go Panther, and go Hummel. Put the pedal to the metal and bring real powerful mobility onto the battlefield. And finally, 2 more observations to end this video. One has to do with a training mission. Obviously, there's no reason whatsoever not to take it, and I urge you to focus on improving your fighters, in particular if you're going for the historical branch, because the Soviets will bring insane astounding amounts of excellent planes with highly experienced crews. The training mission will get your 0 experience Focke-Wulfs 190 to roughly 2.5 stars, which isn't too much, but later in the DLCs will mean the difference between survival and you losing those planes the moment the Soviet fighters decide to gang up on them. 2, and I guess this is probably something I'm the last to find out about, the Force Concentration Commander trait is OP. All it does is make it possible for you to squeeze 4 heroes in a unit rather than 3. It may not sound like much, but if you already have insanely powerful stacks of 3, adding a 4th hero can pretty much propel those units into space. How about this incredibly disgusting thing, and it does clear out cities very easily. Or this, or even this, and it's not even like I've been looking for the most efficient combinations ever. I don't have the focus for that. I just slapped together what worked, and by God, it does. So, if you value your senator, the senator of your family, avoid force concentration at all costs. And this is it for 1943. I'm really looking forward to the next DLC that's coming out very soon. The 2 parallel campaigns are going to be really interesting, but before that, please let me know in the comments if you like this new format and whether I should add anything to it or subtract. Cheers.